Hi there. Okay, we are going to start with our first exercise, which seems really simple, but it really builds the foundation for how we can create paintings that have a lot of depth and space and volume to them. So we're going to do an achromatic mixing scale, a 5-step value scale, and then an ombre, which has a more subtle kind of shift. If you bought the Blick U kit, you have this little Utrecht set, and you can use the ivory black and the titanium. But I'm just going to start us off with some rather inexpensive paint that I got at the craft store. I'm going to use Payne's Gray and titanium white. The difference between Payne's Gray and ivory black is that this is a lot cooler, and we'll talk about that when we get more into color theory. And when you mix it with white, it has like a kind of pretty bluish tint to it. So we're going to use this to kind of get us started. So I'm going to talk about paint like recipes if you're cooking, and I'll try to use references to food to help you know how much paint to use. That's kind of half the battle of painting, is knowing how much. So I'm going to take my Payne's Gray, and on one side of my palette with my Stay Wet Masterson palette paper, I'm going to squirt out approximately the size of paint as a Hershey's Kiss. So we'll start here. Once you get through more of these exercises, hopefully you'll have a good sense of how much is too much or how much is too little, and really capitalizing on it. I'm going to do about the same amount, maybe a little bigger than a Hershey's Kiss of white on the other side. There we go. And then I'm going to take our palette knife. And I want you to, like I said, think of it like cooking recipes. So we're going to try and mix a 5-step, 0, 30, 50, 70, 100. So let's try 50 by mixing half and half. So I'm going to take half white. So not quite the whole bit of white there, but a good chunk of it. And then I'm going to clean my knife off. That's pretty important so that we don't contaminate. The idea when we start mixing more is to put your clean colors on the outside and then to do your mixing on the inside of the palette, and to try not to contaminate those ones on the outside as much as you can. Add a little more black. So it's about 50-50, and we'll see if it looks like it's kind of in that middle range. So when you mix with a knife, you want to scoop or push the pigment together and not stir it. I see a lot of people just use the tip of it and stir, but the idea is that you're squishing those pigments together. So it's like I'm trying to push them into a pile and squish them. So back and forth, back and forth. I've told my painting students over all the years, if you spend a lot of time mixing a really beautiful palette, the paintings kind of make themselves. So a lot of my more advanced students, or even in my beginning painting classes, we will spend a lot of time once we get into color theory just mixing and mixing, and then the paintings just kind of happen. Okay, so you're wondering, what is 50 gray? Well, it's relative. So I think it looks pretty good. It could be a little darker, but it's just that we have a range going through and we can adjust it as we go. So I'm going to take a little bit, maybe 3 chocolate chips worth of the gray, and put it here. And I'm going to put a little bit less, maybe 2 chocolate chips worth here. I'm going to wipe off my palette knife. I'm going to try and scoop this close together too. The closer you can keep your paint into a little tight pile, the less it will want to dry out. So I wipe that off. And then I'm going to try and mix my 30 and my 70. So I'm going to grab 2 or 3 chocolate chips worth of white. You can see that Payne's Gray makes it like this real pretty, dreamy kind of bluish gray. but it will work just the same if you have a Mars black or an ivory back. And like I said, I'll get really into color theory in some different lessons, but this is just to kind of get us going. So I see a good shift, 0, 30, 50, 70, 100. When I mix this up, I think we're in pretty good shape. So I cleaned my knife off. I'm gonna grab more black. You can see that the Stay Wet paper is wet, as you can watch the pigment kind of run out. That's what keeps them from drying out on you. So again, we're squishing with the full side of the knife and not stirring, because you're not going to really get the pigments together. So you're pushing them together like so. Okay, that looks pretty good. So the idea again, 0, 30, 50, 70, 100. And then if you want to start to make paintings that are really realistic, as you're painting, you start to mix the 10s, the 20s, the 40s, and so forth, kind of in between those subtle shifts. Okay, so we're going to start with our synthetic flat. And most of the exercises in this, we're just going to use this brush, but you have all these other ones that you can practice and play with. I can do a whole lesson separate just on brushes and the differences, but just in short, the difference between a flat that is more like a hog hair or a bristle brush versus a synthetic. You can feel that the brush stroke is going to be really different just because the bristles are so different. It also has to do with what they call the snap, how it kind of flips back at you. And that changes the way that the brush stroke goes down too. But like I said, I'll do another video that talks just about brushes. Here's one with a really soft snap that's more like a watercolor brush. But we will talk about that more later. Okay, so it's always a good idea when you're starting with acrylic to just charge your brush a little, dip it in the water, and it just helps the first round of paint flow a little better. So I got it wet and dried it off a little. And I'm just gonna start with my white and I'm gonna paint right on my workbook. My white. What I'm about to show you is like super fun when it comes to saving your paint and keeping things clean. So again, I'm gonna clean my knife off. And when I switch to the next color, I'm gonna take my knife and in that value, I'm gonna squeeze out all that paint. That was a lot of paint in my brush. So I haven't wasted it and I'm not spending a lot of time changing my water all the time because it gets contaminated. So I'm gonna scrub my brush on the bottom of my water just a little bit. I'm gonna dry it off a little and then I'm gonna switch to my 30. So I really charge both sides of the brush and there's quite a bit of paint on there. You see that? I often feel like beginner painters, they struggle because they're afraid to use paint. But this paint is so inexpensive that you should be brave to really use it. Okay, clean my knife again. And then I'm gonna squeeze that paint out. Watch how much is gonna come out. That's a lot of paint in there. So I'll save that for later. So keeping your brush clean is important, but you don't have to be crazy about it. Like right now, I'm about to go into this and I could just take this 30 and mix it in with the 50 and nobody would be concerned. So I'll just show you like if it happens, why you wouldn't worry. So it's like I'm just kind of mixing up that 30 into there and I'm good. It's when you start really working with color that you can make things really muddy, and that's where we have to be careful. So we want to try and get in that habit of cleaning the brush as we shift values or shift colors. So again, quite a bit of paint. I'm going to paint my 50. And I'm just doing these harsh steps. I'm not really worried if I'm painting inside the lines. I can work on those things when we have an actual painting that we're unfolding. Okay. Scrape this off. Shift to my 70 again. I didn't really rinse out the brush because it's all that same value or that same family of color making the value shifts. So I just kind of worked that leftover paint into here instead of putting it in my water. Here's my 70. But I am going to really wash my brush off when I get to my 100 because I want my 100 to be pretty clean. Scoop this out. Lots of paint in the brush. It doesn't have to be sparkling clean, but just enough. And then I'll grab my 100, my solid Payne's Gray. Again, pretty loaded up. And then I have my first value scale. So I talk a lot in my painting studio about how the values can feel like they're in front of the wall, on the wall, or in the wall. And hopefully as you're learning how to work with value and different chromas and hues, you can see what feels like it's closer to you in the picture plane and feels like it's pushing away. So hopefully it feels like these are shifting back like this somewhat. And we'll hopefully then see it a little clearer when we do the ombre scale. Okay, so the idea is that we take this and can make it subtle. What we'll learn as we start painting subjects, not just scales, is that if you can break things into these drastic value shifts, you'll always have a better sense of volume and space. Because if you just try to blend everything at the beginning, it can get too flat too quickly. Okay, so my brush already has the 100 on it, so I'm going to start here. And I'm going to paint it in like a kind of ombre, or excuse me, crosshatch, where I'm like one direction, and kind of keeping the brush stroke what we would call kind of impressionistic or loose. While the brush still has the black on it, I'm going to grab some of my 70. Let's scoop that off there. I'm going to come to my 50. It's a pretty strong jump, so I'm going to grab a little bit of my 70 to kind of cut those together. Grab a little bit of my 30. I'm just wiping off so there's not much pigment there, but still keeping the brush charged with some of the other values. And I'm going to grab some of my white. And the trick is to know how much or how little to have on your brush. So it's like the white is too aggressive and coming down. So here's where I might wipe off my brush a little. I didn't wash it, I just kind of wiped it off. And you have to start layering, kind of working those values in and out of each other. Needs to be a little darker there. So I'm gonna here come between my 50 and my 70 and bring those together. If it gets a little too sticky, you can put your brush in a tiny bit of water and tap it off, and that will help the paint kind of get some of its viscosity flowing again, that kind of movement. And I think it's a little harsh here, so I'm going to grab a little more black. Clean off my brush and clean that up. And there's our more subtle value scale. You can keep working it where it slows down and becomes really, really subtle. But the acrylic has a limit where it will start to get sticky and have a struggle where it's harder to keep making it that kind of softer quality. So something that you can try is you can grab one of the other clean synthetic brushes, get it a little wet, and you can keep feathering with that cross hatching to make the shifts a little more subtle. I'm going to rinse the brush off again. Kind of damp, but not too much. And it's like I'm pushing that pigment from one subtle value shift to the next. Got a little sticky, so I'm going to add a little water. It's kind of like a timing. You have to work pretty quick. I have this white on here and I almost went right here, but I was like, oh no, that'll mix up my softer value there. So you can see how kind of building that feather with this clean damp brush made it more subtle. Okay, so you try it. Make your 0, 30, 50, 70, 100. Do a strong value step, and then see if you can make a subtle one. And then we will get back together and we'll talk about how to make some different kinds of mark making, layered washes, impastos, straight edges, cross hatching, and so forth. We'll try some other stuff, and then we'll move into creating a sphere. So taking this knowledge and then seeing how we can turn it into a form. Okay, I can't wait to see your studies. Be patient with yourself. If it is a struggle the first round, it's because you're getting used to a lot of different materials if you've never painted before. Send me questions either through email or through direct messages on Instagram, and I am here to help. Okay, good luck everybody. Enjoy it. Have fun.